I'm mindful that Cognisco are one of the UK's leading providers of online assessments. What is it that you do? What is it that customers value about your work?
Hi, Jeremy. Yes, thank you. So what do we do? At Cognisco, if I try to capture what we do high level, we help organisations to evidence and manage competency, to demonstrate due diligence and compliance in order to help mitigate risk. That's the high level statement of what we try to do. And we do that in many and varied ways. So one of our leading ways to evidence competency is with our situational judgment type assessment, but the system itself is capable of doing various different types of measures to evidence competency, everything from scheduling training all the way through to high level assessment, evidencing that people are competent, they're likely to do the right thing in reality, and keeping that record. One of our customers describes us as his single source of truth, to be able to manage and mitigate his risk, which is quite nice to know.
Cognisco have been working now for over 25 years. And I'm guessing then from what you say about mitigating risk, you work a lot in regulated industries. So tell me a little bit about your clients and who are your clients? What sort of projects do you undertake with them? How do you work with them?
Sure. Yes, you're right. 25 years of trying to help manage and mitigate risk, and how we were born really was following some of those awful rail disasters back in the 90s, where and early 2000s even, when there was issues with the signal boxes, the signallers, and train crashes were caused as a result of various reasons. But one of the key things that came out was that individual signallers and rail workers needed to understand the rule book. So it was very much a knowledge-based approach to making sure that they understand the rule book and that they're likely to do the right thing in given situations. So hence our assessment methodology was born. Our remit really was to try to standardise the way that the signallers were assessed regularly, to make sure they understood what they needed to know, do and understand in order to be able to play out the rule book in reality. So there's a confidence measure in there as well, because we wanted them not only to be knowledgeable, but confident in their knowledge as well. So that's where our assessment methodology first came about, really.
I love that. And I love that element of not only testing capability, but also confidence as well. So I might be 60% sure I know something, but it's still a development need for me, isn't it? If I'm only 60% certain about it. So I think I'm right. But it's that confidence that you get at as well, which I think is often lost. I mean, that's one thing that I know makes you special and different. And I'm right that you work in regulated industries. So I'm thinking of, for example, pharmaceuticals or certainly financial services, those kind of industries as well. Is that correct? What sort of work are you doing there?
Absolutely. I mean, there's obviously many standards involved in health and safety. Health and safety regulated environments such as, building sites, utilities companies, the rail sector, of course. But of course, our methodology has lent itself and even cross-fertilized into other areas that are also regulated. So, for example, utilities companies with water, we've got regulations involved with those. But as you rightly said, the financial sector as well is heavily regulated. And we've started to introduce our methodology across the last 10 to 15 years in that sector too. The methodology is very similar, but the outcome is the same. We're trying to mitigate risk by highlighting those who know what they should be doing. They're confident in what they should be doing. So they not only know and understand, they're confident in their knowledge, but in doing that type of measure, we can identify those who are likely to do the right thing in reality, but more crucially, those who are likely to get it wrong by being overconfident in their understanding. And that's where we can identify the unconscious incompetent, if you like, by putting people into a situation. Are they likely to do the right thing, and are they confident that that's what the right thing is, actually?
That's fascinating. Now, I know that you're a psychologist, and having worked together, I appreciate that there is a rigorous underpinning behind Cognisco's work. And there is one thing, and I think you're sort of getting at it there, really, which is the thing for me that perhaps chief HR officers, directors of learning and development, or chief talent officers, what in your view do they know that they may not know already or may not know well enough? For me, it's around this unconscious incompetence. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. So many chief learning officers have that remit. They are the learning officers, and learning is very important. But one of our mission statements relates to the fact that learning alone and training alone is not evidence enough to, it's not enough to evidence that individuals are likely to do the right thing. So if we think about the Dunning-Kruger effect, we refer to the Dunning and Kruger effect in psychology, and this is basically a cognitive bias where individuals overestimate their abilities, and they're usually overconfident in their knowledge. So it's basically, it causes people to overestimate their knowledge or their ability, but particularly in areas where they have little or no experience. But what we found is that even those with plenty of experience sometimes have a hubris and overconfidence in the new policies that come in. So sometimes your so-called experts haven't kept up to date for whatever reason, but they're overly confident in their knowledge. And they've also, over the years, got used to finding workarounds. And what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody understands the latest standards, but they're also likely to apply them in context and with confidence. And that's where identifying high-level confidence with low understanding is critical to help manage the Dunning-Kruger effect, because quite often people don't know what they don't know. So that's where I come back full circle to training alone is not enough. You need to evidence that they've understood the training and that they're likely to apply the training. So of course, training's got a place, and we wouldn't be anywhere without it. But I think people rely too much on training alone, and that's where we come in to help to evidence the learning.
You've taught me that the one thing that's worse than not knowing is thinking you're brilliant and not knowing. And isn't that so relevant today? I mean, we live in a time when there's so much change and challenging times, unfamiliar times. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity there as well. But if you're relying on stuff that, you learned 20 years ago, of course I know this, I learned it 20 years ago. Chances are it's not relevant or less relevant today. It may not be the answer going forward. So knowing what you don't know, have it kind of evidencing that as you describe it is so important, so valuable. Can I ask about technology? Technology's one of those things that's making work now so exciting, so different, so full of opportunity, but in many ways unfamiliar. How is technology affecting Cognisco?
Yes, it's a very good question, Jeremy. The impact of technology is huge, really. Over the years, we've seen many changes. So back in the early days of Cognisco, our reporting was reliant very much on cranking the handle of Excel. We progressed onto a reporting engine with pivot tables, and today we've evolved into the Mino platform, that you see today. And we're even evolving that into a new version of Mino 365. Now, the impact on the technology in the world that we see it today is our system has been designed to be a standalone system. However, we've built in the ability to integrate and include the APIs that you need to seamlessly create a user experience. Because what we found is that there is no single platform out there that will do everything an organization needs it to do, to evidence capability, manage, schedule training, do assessments, manage the training records, the scheduling. Now, Mino will do a lot of that on its own, but we're being asked more and more to integrate with things like learning management systems, competency management systems as well, integrate with those so that the end user can have a more joined up experience. But there's lots of different platforms working in the background, and we're seeing that's evolving more and more. The other new impact on technology is, of course, AI. And we've introduced the use of AI into the world of what we do today. So, for example, authoring new assessments, we've started to use AI as a starting point. But what we are finding is that we still need sensible human beings, one, to input sensible information into the AI engine, but then also to verify what you get out the other end is indeed workable, up to date, current, valid. So, validation of whatever we write in any circumstances is critically important to us to maintain that rigor, introduce the validity that you need for both predictive validity from a behavioural perspective, but also very important to have high face validity when you're developing contextually relevant situational judgment tests for our customers. By the way, they're tailored. 9 times out of 10, they're customized, tailored for that customer. They need to be highly relevant, but they need to be accurate and play well to the audience. So lots to consider with the impact of technology today. But, I feel we're moving fairly well with the times. It's an ever-changing beast, as you know. But I think we're holding our own, and it's exciting, isn't it? Moving into the new world.
Very exciting. Describe a little bit, perhaps, how you work with clients. I mean, you mentioned assignments and assessments are tailored. What would a client typically expect when they work with Cognisco? Could you take us through the process there?
Sure. So in order to make sure that we are building something that's relevant, that will be accepted by the target audience, that people can buy into, so we need to ensure high face validity, content validity. So we work with our subject matter experts from the organizations in mind. Now, what I mean by a subject matter expert in our world is not just somebody who understands the policy, the process, the agenda of the assessment itself, but understands what goes on in reality at the front of the business. What happens in any given situation? What should they be doing? What goes wrong? What are the common misunderstandings, common misconceptions that we can build sensible but plausibly incorrect responses to? Because it's learning from the past. So near miss reporting, for example, is a very good way to look at things that have gone wrong. How can we build assessments that actually speak to known misconceptions and things that have gone wrong in the past, to make sure that people can test their experience and their understanding where it's safe to do so. So rather than wait for them to go wrong in situ on the job, that we can assess that their likely behaviour in the background and help to mediate that risk by introducing interventions along the way. Now, you mentioned the leadership capability there. We evolved into writing quite complex situational judgment assessments, as you well know, and you've written some yourself that have played out really, really well. And the good thing about creating situational judgment assessments for leadership is that you can start to assess where people are making good decisions to encourage the behaviours that you need from leaders. And we're not always developing leaders per se, but leadership capability. Leadership capability can play well across many roles, many sectors. And it is, as you say, identifying where they would most benefit from coaching conversations, from further development, and even using what you do to develop their skills in leadership. And then later we can reassess them and see where they've moved to. And there are different ways of doing that too. So situational judgment assessment with confidence will assess their decision makings and therefore likely behaviour in context, but with a corresponding 360 feedback, for example, associated with the same topics, could give them the opportunity to self-rate and have ratings of others as well. And that is much more useful data to an individual trying to develop their capability, because they're not only questioning their own decision making, but they're seeing how they play out and are perceived by others as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? How long does it take? How long do assignments typically take with Cognisco?
We try to keep them reasonable, obviously. I mean, you can develop them to be up to an hour or more long, but we've found that typically 20 to 30 minutes is about as long as people like to tolerate these things, because they are quite challenging. They are cognitively heavy, to read a scenario and then various responses and respond and make some decisions on those accordingly. So they are high on cognitive load. So they do need some time to go through. This is why we've added, the ability to add audio over the top, pictures, videos, make them more interesting and less cognitively heavy on text only. Obviously, we start with text. You have to start somewhere, but where there's capacity and desire, we can create something that's more compelling for the individual. But yeah, I would say 20 to 30 minutes is about average, but sometimes the decision's been taken to use some bite-sized ones, that are 5 to 10 minutes, and then split them. So you'd have some bite-sized light touch modules frequently, rather than one larger, longer assessment.
The other thing I think Cognisco do really, really well is not just information for the individual, so they can reflect on areas of confidence and capability, but actually you provide overviews for the organizations, so they can get a kind of cohort-wide view of where people are confident or where there are capability needs as well. And I know, because we've talked about it before, there's a 30, 50, 20 element which can often come across in that organization-wide reporting. Could you say a little bit about that?
Sure. So over many years, 25 in fact, we've been collecting data on everyone we've ever assessed in all topics. And typically we find that only 20% of anyone we assess across all of the topics that they've been given to assess come out as optimal performance. Optimal to us is somebody who's achieved the benchmark in their knowledge and understanding score, as well as high confidence. They come out in the dark green category for us. So that's good to go. They're knowledgeable, they're highly confident in their knowledge. So that's great. So that's 20% of people are typically good at everything that we've assessed them in. But then you've got a huge 50% of people who have at least some knowledge gaps. And even regardless of confidence, they've got some gaps that you can mitigate those gaps quite reasonably well with some further training, some e-learning courses. Maybe we'll link to a learning management system directly from their report, because what we're trying to do is help organisations make best use of their current resources. So we'll link to their learning management system directly, and then they've got a targeted focus piece of development. And you said earlier as well that the report itself, the process of being asked those questions, is a learning tool in and of itself. Without the learning, they question their own answers from the feedback from their report. But then on the other end of that, we've got people who have perhaps got a lot more of their questions wrong than right, but also were highly confident in their answers at the time. These people would come out in what we call our red category or high risk category. These people who were highly confident in their answers, but actually technically wrong, that they would likely do the wrong thing in reality. And so we want to try and catch those sooner rather than later. There is another category as well that is lower confidence, but still misunderstanding. They're not quite so risky, but there's still an intervention required there. Another interesting category that comes out is those who are light green, who have technically answered all the questions correctly, good answers, but they weren't as confident in their answers. Now there's no point throwing more training at those people. You want to have maybe a coaching conversation with those people, because you can say, well, you know, why didn't you understand what you were doing? Why did you feel that you couldn't be highly confident in your answer? That's a different thing than throwing more training at those people. So where we would throw more training is the reds certainly prioritise training on those red outcomes, but the yellow outcomes as well can be easily mitigated, as I said before. But we found that 30% of our people have at least one risk or misplaced confidence on any one or more topics that we've assessed them on, which is quite remarkable that there are so many risk gaps there. And without testing in this way, you wouldn't know it until something goes wrong, because they've had the training, they've had that tick in the box, they've had the training, they've ticked the box, and they assumed good to go. But actually, we've unearthed there's still some misunderstandings even after that.
Am I right? Cognisco works well with coaches as well, because in all of those categories, even the 20% that are spot on, well, what's the next challenge for them? How can they build on that? But in all of those categories you mentioned, everybody would benefit from a coach. Everybody would benefit from a conversation that says, okay, how do you feel about these results? Where do we go next? Is that your experience?
Yes, absolutely. We've worked with management and leadership organisations before. In fact, we developed an assessment with the Chartered Management Institute many years ago that's still being used today. And that one was around performance management and employee engagement. There's two different areas that we've assessed there. And these lend themselves very well to working with coaches and mentors and those giving feedback on any types of assessment and development. Now, what the report does that's really useful for a coach is to flag up the areas for coaching conversations. So, for example, you've obviously got your results for the individual that you want to talk to, and you can look at where they might have light green. So there's a strong understanding, but not so much confidence. And there's another conversation to be had about those who perhaps have the Dunning-Kruger effect. They are misplaced confidence, overly confident, but misunderstanding an area of their business or an area of management expertise that you're trying to develop. Now, identifying those people, having the coaching conversation is really useful. By using that report, you'll at least have a starting point. You've at least got a focus on what you can be having a conversation about, rather than waiting for an issue to come up. You can actually use the report itself, identify where they've got their own training needs, and discuss whether they knew they had that training need. Do they accept that they've got that training need? Sometimes we've worked with people and they say, well, actually, this has been a really good process because it's made me think about how I manage people in a different way. At the very least, it's got people to think differently about how they manage. And even the topic areas aren't thought about on a daily basis, but actually shine a light on those things that you ought to be thinking about as a manager. suddenly they come to the surface and you start to at least think about your own behavior and your own influence on others. So it's much more a growth empowerment way of managing people rather than a tell-do approach.